When Evelyn Ward stepped off that train in Iron Creek, Montana, wearing nothing but rags and desperation, the townspeople whispered she'd be gone within a week. They didn't know what Caleb Rourke saw in her hollow eyes, a fire that matched his own. This is the story of a woman who arrived with nothing, and a man who learned that worth isn't measured in gold or finery, but in the courage to rebuild from ashes. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The afternoon sun hung low over Montana territory in the autumn of 1883, casting long shadows across the railway platform of Iron Creek. It was the kind of light that made everything look both beautiful and desolate at the same time. Golden, but cold. Promising, but empty. Caleb Rourke stood with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his weathered face expressionless as he watched the black locomotive crawl into the station, metal screeching against metal, steam billowing like the breath of some ancient beast. He didn't want to be here. In his 34 years of life, Caleb had learned that wanting things only led to losing them. He'd wanted his parents to survive that winter fever. They hadn't. He'd wanted his younger brother Thomas to stay away from the bottle. He couldn't. He'd wanted to keep his ranch running smoothly after Thomas died, leaving behind an 8-year-old boy who barely spoke. And now here he was, waiting for a stranger to step into his broken life because he couldn't manage it alone anymore. A mail-order bride. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. The train hissed to a stop, and passengers began to disembark. Caleb watched them carefully. A merchant in a fine suit, 2 miners still covered in dust, an elderly couple helping each other down the steps. Then he saw her. She emerged from the third-class car like a shadow-given form. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than patched fabric held together by desperation and thread. The hem was torn and muddy, the sleeves frayed at the edges. Her boots were split at the seams, held together with what looked like twine. A thin shawl, more holes than fabric, was wrapped around her shoulders against the September chill. But it wasn't her clothing that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. It was her eyes. Even from 20 feet away, even beneath the shadow of her worn bonnet, he could see them, dark, deep, and absolutely unbroken. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had lost everything but refused to lose themselves. Her spine was straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her movements, her chin lifted despite the whispers that immediately started among the townspeople on the platform. "That's her?" Old Mrs. Henderson stage whispered to her daughter, loud enough for half the platform to hear. "That's the woman Caleb Rourke sent for. Good Lord, she looks like she's been living in a ditch." "Mother, shush," her daughter hissed, but the damage was done. Caleb saw the moment Evelyn heard the words, saw the slight flinch, the tightening around her eyes, the way her hands clutched the handle of her single, battered carpet bag, just a little tighter. But she didn't stop walking, didn't look away. She moved toward him with purpose, and when she reached him, she set down her bag and met his gaze directly. "You must be Mr. Rourke," she said. Her voice was soft but steady, with the faint remnants of an Eastern accent, Boston, maybe, or Philadelphia. "Call me Caleb," he replied, removing his hat. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd expected, maybe 25 or 26, but her face held the kind of weariness that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with surviving. "You had a good journey, Miss Ward?" "It was adequate," she said simply. "Thank you for meeting me." He almost laughed at that, adequate, as if 3 days on a train traveling from God knows where was just another Tuesday afternoon. As if standing on a platform in a strange town wearing clothes that would embarrass a beggar was just mildly inconvenient. "That all you've got?" he asked, gesturing to the carpet bag. "Yes." No explanation, no apology, just that single word. Caleb picked up the bag, it weighed almost nothing, and gestured toward his wagon. "Come on then, ranch is about an hour outside town. We should get moving before dark." They walked through the small crowd, and Caleb felt every eye on them. He knew what they were thinking. Caleb Rourke, the proud rancher who'd barely spoken to anyone since his brother died, had sent away for a beggar woman to take care of his nephew. It would be the talk of Iron Creek for weeks. Let them talk. He helped Evelyn up onto the wagon bench. Her hand was cold even through her thin gloves, and climbed up beside her. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses moving, and they left the whispers behind. For the first several miles, neither of them spoke. The road wound through sparse grassland, past abandoned claim stakes and the occasional weathered fence. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the darkening sky. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, acutely aware of the woman beside him, of the way she sat with perfect posture despite the rough jostling of the wagon, of how she seemed to be drinking in the landscape with those dark, watchful eyes. Finally, she broke the silence. "Your letter said you needed help with your nephew," she said. "How old is the boy?" "Ben's 8. He'll be 9 come December." "And his parents?" Caleb's jaw tightened. His mother died bringing him into the world. His father, my brother Thomas, died 6 months ago. Riding accident, but... He paused, then decided honesty was better than pretense. But he'd been drinking. He drank too much, especially after his wife passed. The ranch went to hell while he was drowning himself in whiskey, and when he finally killed himself falling off his horse in a drunken stupor, he left me with a broken-down property and a boy who hasn't spoken more than 10 words at a time since the funeral. He'd never said it so bluntly before, never laid it out so raw and real. But something about this woman, this stranger in rags who sat with the bearing of a queen, made him want to speak the truth. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry for your losses, and I'm sorry for Ben's." "The boy needs a woman's hand," Caleb continued. "Needs someone who can give him the kind of attention I can't while trying to keep the ranch from falling apart completely. I can cook basic meals and mend basic tears, but I can't give him a home. Not the way a child needs. I need someone who can." "I understand." "The letter explained the arrangement," Caleb said, feeling suddenly awkward. "You'd help with Ben and the household. In exchange, you'd have room, board, and a small salary when I can spare it. I'm not looking for a wife in the romantic sense, Miss Ward. I'm looking for help." "I understand," she repeated. "And I'm not looking for romance, Mr. Rourke. I'm looking for a roof that doesn't leak and a place where I don't have to fear what tomorrow brings. We both need something. That seems like a fair foundation for an arrangement." He glanced at her then, really looked at her. In the fading light, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight hollowness of her cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals, the way her clothes hung on a frame that had once been fuller. But he also saw the set of her shoulders, the steadiness of her gaze, the quiet strength in every line of her body. "What happened to you?" he asked before he could stop himself. Then immediately, "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "It's all right," Evelyn said softly. She looked out at the mountains, and something in her expression shifted, became both harder and more fragile at once. "I was married 3 years. My husband was a clerk in Philadelphia, a good man, a kind man. We had a small house, a small life, and I was content. Then the fever came through. Yellow fever. It took him in 4 days." She paused, her hands folding carefully in her lap. "When he died, I discovered he'd been borrowing money to pay for things, doctors for his mother, debts from his father's failed business, things he'd never told me about because he wanted to protect me from worry. His creditors came for everything. The house, the furniture, my mother's silver, even my wedding dress. They left me with the clothes I was wearing and a single bag. I stayed with my sister for a while, but her husband didn't want me there. Another mouth to feed, he said. So I left." "Where'd you go?" "Wherever I could. I worked in a factory for a time, but the foreman..." She stopped, and Caleb saw her hands tighten in her lap. He expected more than work from the women under his employ. When I refused, he dismissed me. I found other work, washing, mending, cleaning, barely enough to keep me fed and housed. I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides in a newspaper someone had left on a bench. I'd never considered such a thing before, but... She looked at him then, and her eyes were steady. "Desperation makes you consider a great many things you never thought you would." Caleb nodded slowly. He understood desperation. He lived with it every day, trying to hold together a property and raise a child when he barely knew how to hold himself together. "I won't expect more than what we agreed," he said firmly. "You help with Ben in the house, you'll have a place here. That's the arrangement. My word on it." "Thank you," she said quietly. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Caleb cleared his throat. "Fair warning," he said. "The ranch isn't much to look at. Thomas let it go pretty bad these last few years, and I've been trying to fix things while also running cattle and keeping Ben alive. The house needs work. The barn needs work. Hell, even the well needs work. It's not what you might have expected. Mr. Rourke, Evelyn said, and there was the faintest hint of dry humor in her voice. I arrived wearing rags and carrying everything I own in a bag that weighs less than a newborn calf. My expectations are remarkably modest. Despite everything, despite the weight of the day, the strangeness of the situation, the grief that lived in his chest like a permanent stone, Caleb almost smiled. Fair point, he said. As they crested the final ridge, the ranch came into view below them. Even in the twilight, Caleb could see it with brutal honesty. The house with its sagging porch and missing shingles, the barn with its damaged roof, the fences that needed mending in a dozen places, the overgrown garden plot that had once been his mother's pride. It looked exactly like what it was, a place that had been neglected, that had suffered, that was barely holding on. He felt Evelyn go still beside him. That's it, he said flatly. That's the ranch. She was quiet for so long that he thought she might ask him to turn the wagon around, to take her back to town so she could catch the next train east. He wouldn't have blamed her, but then she spoke, and her voice was thoughtful rather than dismayed. It has good bones, she said. The house is solid, even if it needs repair. The barn can be fixed. The land is good. I can see that even in this light. It's not broken, Mr. Rourke. It's just tired. There's a difference. Something in Caleb's chest loosened just slightly. You see all that, do you? He asked. I do. She turned to look at him, and in the dying light her eyes were steady and sure. I know what it's like to be tired but not broken. I recognize it when I see it. They descended the ridge in the gathering darkness. As they approached the house, the front door opened, and a small figure appeared on the porch, Ben, thin and wary, watching them approach with the cautious eyes of a child who'd learned not to trust that good things would stay. Caleb brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then moved around to help Evelyn descend. She gathered her carpet bag and her shawl, and together they walked to the porch. Ben, Caleb said, this is Miss Evelyn Ward. She's come to help us out for a while. Miss Ward, this is my nephew, Ben Rourke. Evelyn looked down at the boy, and Caleb watched something shift in her expression. A softening, a recognition, as if she saw something in Ben's careful, closed-off face that she understood intimately. She didn't crouch down to his level or speak in the artificially bright tone some adults used with children. Instead, she simply nodded to him with the same gravity she might show an adult. Hello, Ben, she said quietly. I'm pleased to meet you. Ben stared at her for a long moment, taking in her worn clothes and tired face. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, You look sad. Caleb tensed, ready to reprimand the boy for rudeness, but Evelyn held up a hand to stop him. I am sad, she told Ben honestly. I've had some hard times lately, but I'm hoping that being here might help with that. Do you think it might? Ben considered this with the seriousness of a much older child. Then he shrugged. Maybe. It's pretty quiet here. Uncle Caleb says quiet is good for thinking. Your uncle is a wise man, Evelyn said. She glanced at Caleb, and he saw the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. I think I'm going to like it here. Caleb led them inside, lighting lamps as they went. The house was clean, he'd made sure of that at least, but it was sparse and clearly lacking a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs stood in the center. The furniture was simple and well-worn. Stairs led up to 3 small bedrooms on the second floor. I'll show you to your room, Caleb said, picking up her carpet bag again. It's not much, but it's got a good bed and a window that catches the morning light. Ben and I are in the other 2 rooms upstairs. There's a washroom out back, and we've got a pump in the kitchen for water. He led her up the narrow stairs to the smallest of the 3 bedrooms. It held a simple bed with a plain quilt, a small dresser with a cracked mirror, and a wooden chair by the window. The walls were bare, the floorboards worn but clean. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment, and Caleb found himself holding his breath, waiting for her reaction. It's perfect, she said finally. It's half empty and needs paint, Caleb said. It's mine, Evelyn replied simply. That makes it perfect. She set her carpet bag on the bed and turned to face him, and in the lamplight he could see the exhaustion that lined her face, the way she held herself as if standing upright required conscious effort. I'll let you get settled, he said. There's water in the pitcher on the dresser. Come down when you're ready, and I'll heat up some stew for supper. Mr. Rourke, she said, stopping him at the door, thank you for this, for taking a chance on someone who arrived with nothing. Caleb looked at her standing there in her ragged dress in that bare room, and something in his chest shifted. You didn't arrive with nothing, Miss Ward, he said quietly. You arrived with yourself. That's something. He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Downstairs, Ben was sitting at the table, drawing on a piece of paper with a stub of pencil. He looked up when Caleb entered. Is she staying? The boy asked. That's the plan, Caleb replied, moving to the stove to stir the pot of stew he'd left simmering. She's going to help out around here. Help take care of you. Help with the house. Think you can be good for her? Ben nodded slowly. She looks like she needs help too. Out of the mouths of babes, Caleb thought. The boy was right. Evelyn Ward looked like she'd been through hell, and somehow walked out the other side, but only barely. She looked like she needed rest and peace, and time to heal as much as his ranch needed repairs and his nephew needed mothering. Maybe we can all help each other, Caleb said. When Evelyn came downstairs 20 minutes later, she'd removed her bonnet and shawl, revealing dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. She'd washed her face and hands, but she still wore the same ragged dress, because of course she did. It was probably all she had. Tomorrow, Caleb decided. Tomorrow he'd give her some money and send her to town to buy fabric. She could sew, surely. Most women could. She could make herself something better than rags. They ate supper in near silence, the three of them around the table. The stew was basic but filling: beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions in a thin broth. Evelyn ate slowly, methodically, like someone who'd learned to make small meals last as long as possible. Ben watched her with open curiosity, and Caleb found himself watching both of them, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. After supper, Evelyn insisted on washing the dishes despite her obvious exhaustion. Caleb didn't argue. He was learning that this woman had her own kind of pride, the kind that came from holding on to dignity when everything else had been stripped away. Ben, he said, time for bed. The boy nodded and stood, then surprised them both by walking over to Evelyn at the wash basin. Good night, Miss Ward, he said quietly. She dried her hands and turned to him, and her smile was the first genuine one Caleb had seen from her, soft and real and just a little bit sad. Good night, Ben, she replied. Sleep well. After the boy had gone upstairs, Caleb and Evelyn stood in the kitchen, the silence between them comfortable but weighted with all the things they weren't saying. I'll be up before dawn, Caleb said finally. I've got cattle to check and fences to mend. You don't need to rise that early. Sleep as long as you need. Ben usually wakes around 6 and will need breakfast. After that, the day is yours to figure out. Like I said, the house needs work, but pace yourself. There's no rush. I'm used to rising early, Evelyn said. I'll be up with you. You don't have to. Mr. Rourke, she said, and there was steel beneath the softness of her voice. I came here to work, to help, to earn my place. I won't do that by sleeping late and taking leisurely breakfasts. I'll be up with you and I'll do what needs doing. That's the arrangement we made. Caleb studied her for a moment, this woman who'd arrived in rags but stood before him now with the bearing of a general preparing for battle. All right, he said, if you insist, but if you need rest, you take it. Understood? Understood, she replied, though they both knew she had no intention of taking rest any time soon. Caleb nodded and turned toward the stairs. Good night then, Miss Ward. Good night, Mr. Rourke, she said. And thank you. Again. He paused, one hand on the banister. Stop thanking me. You're working for your keep. It's a fair exchange. Perhaps, she said softly. But some fair exchanges are still worth gratitude. Caleb lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling of his room and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the wind against the windows, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of old wood settling, and now something new. The soft footsteps of a woman moving around in the room next to Ben's, the faint sound of her preparing for bed, the silence that followed. He'd brought a stranger into his home, into his life, into his nephew's fragile world. A woman who arrived with nothing, who looked half-starved and wholly exhausted, who wore rags and carried her entire life in a single bag. But when he closed his eyes, what he saw wasn't the rags or the exhaustion. What he saw were those eyes, dark and deep and absolutely unbroken. And he thought, maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe, just maybe, this broken ranch and this broken woman and this broken man and this wounded boy could somehow help each other heal. Or maybe it was just desperate hope speaking. Time would tell. The moon rose high over Montana territory, casting silver light across the ranch that had once been thriving and was now just surviving. In the house, 3 people slept, or tried to, each carrying their own burdens, their own losses, their own desperate hopes that tomorrow might be better than today. And in the smallest bedroom, Evelyn Ward lay in a real bed for the first time in months, staring at the ceiling and feeling something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. And after everything she'd lost, everything she'd endured, possibility felt like a miracle. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of autumn and winter and whatever lay beyond. Inside, 3 hearts beat in the darkness, each hoping, against all odds and evidence, that they might have finally found a place to rest. The story was just beginning. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, he lay perfectly still in the pre-dawn darkness, disoriented. He always made the coffee. He'd been making the coffee every morning for 6 months, since Thomas died and left him alone with Ben and a ranch that demanded more than one man could give. The routine was carved into his bones now: wake before the sun, dress in the cold, stumble downstairs, light the stove, set the coffee to brew, while his mind slowly emerged from the fog of sleep. But this morning, someone had beaten him to it. He dressed quickly, splashing cold water on his face from the basin in his room, and descended the stairs to find Evelyn Ward already in the kitchen. She'd lit the lamps in the stove, and the coffee pot was bubbling cheerfully over the heat. She was standing at the counter in the same ragged dress from yesterday, her hair pulled back severely, slicing bread with one of his knives. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept well, or much, or possibly at all. "Good morning," she said quietly. "I hope you don't mind. I heard you moving around upstairs and thought I'd get started." "It's not even 5 yet," Caleb said, moving to the coffee pot. "I told you that you didn't need to wake this early." "And I told you I would," she replied simply, setting the sliced bread aside and moving to the small pantry. "I found eggs and bacon. Is that acceptable for breakfast?" Caleb poured himself a cup of coffee. It was strong and hot and perfect, and watched her move through his kitchen with quiet efficiency. She was learning the space, memorizing where things were kept, adjusting to the rhythms of a house that wasn't hers but might become so. "Evelyn," he said, and she paused at the sound of her first name. They'd been using Mr. Rourke and Miss Ward like armor between them, formal and distant and safe. "You can't keep wearing that dress? After breakfast, I'm giving you money to go into town. Buy fabric, needles, thread, whatever you need to make yourself some proper clothes. And before you argue," he added, seeing her mouth open to protest, "it's not charity. A woman who's cooking and cleaning and taking care of a child needs clothes that won't fall apart. It's practical, not pity." She stood very still for a moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes, pride versus necessity, dignity versus desperation. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said. "I'll pay you back. Once I've saved enough from my salary—" "We'll worry about that later," Caleb interrupted. "For now, just get yourself what you need." Ben stumbled down the stairs half an hour later, his hair standing up in every direction, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He stopped short when he saw Evelyn at the stove, as if he'd forgotten overnight that she was real, that she was staying. "Morning," he mumbled. "Good morning, Ben," Evelyn said, and Caleb heard the warmth in her voice, the gentleness. "I'm making eggs and bacon." "How do you like your eggs?" The boy shrugged, climbing into his chair at the table. "Don't matter." "Of course it matters, Chasan," Evelyn said, turning to look at him fully. "Some people like them scrambled soft, some like them firm. Some like them fried with runny yolks, some like them hard. There's no wrong answer, Ben. I just want to know what you prefer. It was such a small thing, Caleb thought, watching his nephew's face. Such a tiny question. But no one had asked Ben what he preferred in months, maybe years. Thomas had been too lost in his grief and bottle to notice his son's preferences, and Caleb had been too focused on keeping them both fed and alive to think about whether the boy liked his eggs one way or another. Scrambled, Ben said finally, quietly. Soft. Scrambled soft it is, Evelyn said, and she smiled at him, that same gentle, slightly sad smile from last night. Thank you for telling me. They ate breakfast together as the sun began to rise, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber. Evelyn had made enough food for all three of them, and Caleb noticed that she served Ben and himself generous portions while taking very little for her own plate. When he pushed more eggs onto her dish, she opened her mouth to protest. You need to eat, he said flatly. You're thin as a rail. I won't have you collapsing from hunger while trying to take care of my nephew. I'm fine, she said. You're not, he replied. Eat. They stared at each other across the table, and Caleb saw the flash of defiance in her eyes. She didn't like being told what to do, didn't like being seen as weak or needy. He understood that. He respected it. But he also wasn't going to watch her starve herself out of misplaced pride. Please, he added, softening his tone. She ate. After breakfast, Caleb pressed a fold of bills into Evelyn's hand despite her protests. Take the wagon into town, he told her. Get what you need. Ben can come with me today. I'm mending the fence in the north pasture, and he can help. I can stay and work on the house, Ben said quickly, looking at Evelyn. I can show Miss Ward where things are, help her with… The fence needs 2 sets of hands, Caleb said firmly, but not unkindly. He understood what the boy was doing, trying to protect this new presence in their lives, trying to make sure she didn't disappear while they weren't looking. Miss Ward will still be here when we get back. I promise. Evelyn knelt down so she was at eye level with Ben, and Caleb saw something pass between them, a recognition, an understanding. I'll be here, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere, Ben. I just need to go to town for a few hours, and then I'll be back. All right? The boy nodded slowly, and Caleb felt something twist in his chest at the naked hope in his nephew's face. They left Evelyn hitching up the wagon, and Caleb and Ben headed north with tools and wire. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of autumn day that made Montana Territory feel like the most beautiful place on earth, wide sky, endless grass, mountains standing like sentinels in the distance. They worked in companionable silence for a while, replacing rotted fence posts and restringing wire. Ben was small but steady, holding posts while Caleb hammered, fetching tools without being asked. The boy had grown up fast these past months, had learned to read silences and moods, had developed the careful watchfulness of a child who'd seen adults fall apart. You like her? Ben asked suddenly, not looking up from the wire he was untangling. Caleb paused mid-swing. Miss Ward? Yeah. I don't know her well enough to like or dislike her, Caleb said carefully. She seems capable, seems honest. That's enough for now. She's sad, Ben said, echoing his observation from last night. Really sad. Like Pa was before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Caleb set down his hammer and looked at his nephew, this boy who'd lost his mother before he could remember her, who'd watched his father drink himself into an early grave, who'd been passed to an uncle who barely knew how to care for himself, let alone a child. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. She's sad. She's had hard times, lost people she loved. Sad doesn't mean broken, Ben. Your pa was sad, but he was also… He paused, choosing his words carefully. He was drowning. He couldn't see past his grief. Miss Ward, she's sad, but she's still standing, still moving forward. There's a difference. She stay? Ben asked, and his voice was so small, so hopeful, that Caleb felt his heart crack just a little. I don't know, he admitted, because he'd learned that lying to the boy did more harm than good. But I think she wants to. I think she needs a place to belong as much as we need help. So maybe if we're all patient with each other, if we all try, maybe she'll stay. Ben nodded and went back to work. But Caleb saw the way his small shoulders had relaxed slightly, the way some tension had left his frame. In town, Evelyn Ward navigated the general store with the focused determination of a general planning a campaign. She'd made a mental list during the wagon ride: fabric for at least 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sunday. Thread, needles, buttons, undergarments, a nightgown, a pair of boots that didn't have holes, a warm shawl for winter. The proprietor, a round man named Mr. Jameson, watched her with barely concealed curiosity as she moved through the store, touching fabrics, checking prices, calculating in her head. "You're the woman staying at the Rourke place," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Evelyn replied evenly, not looking up from the bolt of sturdy blue cotton she was examining. "Must be quite a change coming from back east to a ranch in the middle of nowhere." "It is," she agreed, but not an unwelcome one. She could feel the weight of his judgment, the questions he wasn't quite asking. What kind of woman arrives in rags to keep house for a widower and his nephew? What desperation or scandal drove her west? The whispers had probably already spread through town. Mrs. Henderson would have made sure of that. Let them whisper. She'd survived worse than gossip. She selected her fabrics, practical, durable, nothing fancy, and brought them to the counter along with her other necessities. As Mr. Jameson tallied the cost, the bell above the door chimed, and 2 women entered. Evelyn recognized them from the train platform yesterday, Mrs. Henderson and her daughter. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying through the small store, "if it isn't Caleb Rourke's new help." The pause before the word help was deliberate, loaded with insinuation. Evelyn kept her eyes on Mr. Jameson as he wrapped her purchases. "Good morning," she said politely. "I'm surprised to see you in town so soon," Mrs. Henderson continued, moving closer. "Settling in well, are you?" "Well enough, thank you." "It must be quite an adjustment, living out there with just Mr. Rourke and that poor boy." Another loaded pause. "Quite isolated, quite intimate." Evelyn finally turned to face the older woman, and she saw Mrs. Henderson's eyes widen slightly at whatever she saw in Evelyn's face. "Mr. Rourke has been nothing but proper and respectful," Evelyn said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. "He needed help with his nephew and his household. I needed employment and a place to stay. It's a straightforward arrangement, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't suggest otherwise." "I'm not suggesting anything," Mrs. Henderson said, though her flushed face suggested otherwise. "I'm simply saying that people will talk. A single woman living with a single man." "Then people should find better things to occupy their time," Evelyn interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to return to." She paid Mr. Jameson, gathered her packages, and walked out of the store with her head high and her spine straight, even though her hands were shaking and her heart was pounding. She'd dealt with worse than small-town gossip in Philadelphia, the creditors who'd stripped her home, the landlords who'd propositioned her in lieu of rent, the factory foreman whose hands wandered and whose threats were clear. She could handle Mrs. Henderson's insinuations, but it still stung. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Evelyn focused on the landscape, on the vast openness of it, on the way the wind moved through the grass like invisible hands. She'd spent the last year feeling trapped by poverty, by circumstance, by the walls of factories and boarding houses and her sister's disapproving home. Here, there were no walls, just space and sky and the distant mountains. It felt like she could finally breathe. When she arrived back at the ranch, Caleb and Ben were still out working. She unhitched the wagon, stabled the horses. She'd learned how to do that years ago, in another life, and brought her packages inside. Then she stood in the main room of the house and really looked at it for the first time. Caleb had been right. It needed work. The floors were swept but dull, the windows clouded with dust, the curtains faded and thin. The furniture was sturdy but worn, the walls bare and dingy. But like she'd told him last night, it had good bones. The structure was sound, the fireplace well-built, the layout practical. It just needed care, attention, love. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Caleb and Ben returned hours later, exhausted and hungry, the house had been transformed. Evelyn had scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, washed the windows until they sparkled, taken down the old curtains and set them to soak. She dusted every surface, swept every corner, organized the pantry and the cupboards. The main room glowed in the afternoon light, and the smell of bread baking filled the air. Caleb stopped in the doorway, Ben beside him, and just stared. "I know it's not much," Evelyn said, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd fashioned one from an old flour sack. "But it's a start. I thought—" "It's incredible," Caleb interrupted, his voice rough. "I didn't expect— I told you to pace yourself, to rest." "I don't need rest," Evelyn said. "I need to work. I need to feel useful. Please don't ask me to sit idle, Mr. Rourke. I can't. I won't." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what he'd seen last night. Steel wrapped in softness, strength disguised as fragility. This woman who'd arrived with nothing was already remaking his home, already bringing light into spaces that had been dark for too long. "All right," he said finally, "but tomorrow you take time to sew yourself those dresses. That's not negotiable." She smiled, just a little. "Tomorrow," she agreed. They ate lunch together, fresh bread and cheese and cold meat, and Evelyn listened as Ben chattered about the fence work, about the calf they'd seen, about how Uncle Caleb had let him hammer 3 posts all by himself. The boy was more animated than Caleb had seen him in months, his eyes bright, his hands gesturing as he spoke. And Evelyn listened with complete attention, asking questions, making observations, treating his 8-year-old excitement with the same seriousness she might show an adult's conversation. After lunch, Ben disappeared upstairs to rest. The morning's work had exhausted him, and Caleb found himself alone with Evelyn in the kitchen. She was washing dishes again, her hands red from the hot water and work. "I need to ask you something," he said abruptly. She turned, wariness flickering across her face. "All right. Can you read?" She blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Yes. I can read and write and do arithmetic. My father insisted on education for his daughters, said ignorance was the worst kind of poverty." "Good," Caleb said, "because Ben needs schooling, and I'm not equipped to teach him. I can read well enough, and my arithmetic is solid for ranch work, but I never got much formal education. If you could work with him, reading, writing, numbers, I'd be grateful. I'll pay extra for it." "You don't need to pay extra," Evelyn said. "Teaching Ben would be part of caring for him. I'd be happy to do it." "Still," Caleb insisted, "education matters. It should be compensated." They looked at each other across the kitchen, and Caleb felt something shift between them, a deepening of the arrangement, a recognition that this was becoming more than just a transaction of labor for shelter. "There's one more thing," he said, and he felt his chest tighten with what he was about to say. "In town, there will be talk. About you being here, about the situation. People will make assumptions, spread gossip. I want you to know that I won't tolerate anyone speaking ill of you. You have my protection, my name if you need it. No one will question your honor while you're under my roof." Evelyn's eyes went bright, and she turned quickly back to the dishes, but not before he saw the sheen of tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means more than you know." They didn't speak of it again, but something had been said, something important. Boundaries had been set and protections offered. They were building something here, Caleb realized. Not romance or love. Neither of them was ready for that, might never be ready for that. But something else. A partnership. A family of broken pieces trying to fit together. That evening, after supper, Evelyn sat by the fire with the fabric she'd bought and began cutting patterns. Caleb had given her one of his mother's old pattern books. He'd found it in a trunk upstairs, and she studied it carefully, measuring and marking with small, precise movements. Ben sat at the table with a slate, practicing his letters under the lamplight. Every so often he'd look up at Evelyn, as if checking that she was still there, still real. Caleb sat in his father's old chair, supposedly reading the newspaper that was 3 weeks old, but really watching the two of them, this woman and this boy, and feeling something he hadn't felt since before Thomas died. Pete. It was fragile and tentative, built on uncertain foundations. But it was there. "Tell me about your family," Evelyn said suddenly, not looking up from her cutting. "Your parents, Thomas, how you came to have this ranch." Caleb set down the newspaper. It was the first personal question she'd asked, the first time she'd tried to know him rather than just work for him. "My parents homesteaded this land 30 years ago," he began. Came out from Missouri with nothing but a wagon and a dream and more courage than sense. They built the house, cleared the land, raised cattle. It was hard. Everything in Montana is hard, but they made it work. My father was tough but fair. My mother was the strongest person I've ever known. She could shoot straight, ride hard, and still make the best apple pie in the territory. He paused, remembering. Thomas and I grew up here. He was younger by 4 years, always a bit softer than me, more sensitive. He fell hard for a girl named Sarah when he was 20. She was a teacher's daughter from town. They married young, and when Ben came, Thomas thought he had everything. But Sarah died in childbirth, and Thomas, he couldn't recover from it. He tried, for a while. Tried to be a good father, to keep working the ranch. But the grief was too big, and eventually he drowned in it. Literally drowned in whiskey and regret. "And your parents?" Evelyn asked gently. "Winter fever took them both 5 years ago. Same week. I inherited the ranch and Thomas inherited his grief. We tried to work it together, but he was too far gone. I was managing a neighboring property at the time, couldn't be here every day. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, Thomas was already drinking himself to death and the ranch was falling apart." He stopped, his jaw tight with old anger and older grief. "I failed him," he said finally. "I should have seen it earlier, should have done more. But I was angry at him for giving up, for choosing whiskey over his son. I let that anger keep me away, and by the time I came back, it was too late." "You didn't fail him," Evelyn said, and there was something fierce in her voice. "He made his choices. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Believe me, I watched my husband's family tear him apart with their demands and debts, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sometimes people are drowning, and no matter how hard you try to throw them a rope, they won't grab hold." Caleb looked at her and saw understanding in her eyes, the understanding of someone who'd also lost people, who'd also carried the weight of wondering if they could have done more. "How did you survive it?" he asked. "After your husband died? After you lost everything? How did you keep going?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands still on the fabric in her lap. "I didn't have a choice," she said finally. "Giving up would have meant dying, literally. So I put one foot in front of the other. I took whatever work I could find, slept wherever I could afford, ate when I could. I stopped thinking about tomorrow and just focused on surviving today. And eventually, enough todays passed that I was still alive, still standing. Not whole, maybe, not healed, but surviving." "And now?" Caleb asked. She looked up at him then, and in the firelight her eyes were dark and deep and infinite. "Now I'm trying to do more than just survive," she said quietly. "I'm trying to find a reason to keep standing beyond simple stubbornness. I'm trying to believe that maybe there's something worth staying for." The moment stretched between them, fragile and weighted with things neither of them was ready to name. Ben's voice broke the silence. "Miss Ward, is this letter right? The R?" Evelyn turned to him immediately, crossing to the table to examine his slate, and the moment passed. But it left something behind, an acknowledgement, a recognition. They were both broken, both trying to heal, both hoping that maybe, in this house on this ranch under this vast Montana sky, they might find a way forward. The days began to blend into a rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn to work the ranch, and Evelyn rose with him, cooking breakfast, packing lunch, sending him and Ben off with warm food and warmer words. She spent her days transforming the house, scrubbing, mending, organizing, bringing order to chaos and light to darkness. In the afternoons, she taught Ben his letters and numbers, sitting with him at the table and patiently guiding his small hand across the slate. And in the evenings, they came together, all three of them, for supper and quiet conversation, building something that felt almost like a family. Evelyn made herself 2 dresses from the fabric she'd bought, one of sturdy blue cotton for everyday work, one of softer brown wool for Sunday. They were simple, practical, but they fit properly and had no holes, and when she wore them, she stood a little straighter, held her head a little higher. She mended Caleb's shirts and Ben's torn trousers. She baked bread and made stews and stretched their supplies with the skill of someone who'd learned to make little go far. She planted bulbs in the garden plot for spring and pruned back the overgrown bushes around the house. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadows under her eyes began to fade. Her face filled out slightly as she began eating proper meals. Her movements became less careful, less guarded, as she started to believe that this place might actually be safe. Ben blossomed under her attention like a flower finding sun after a long winter. He began talking more, laughing occasionally, showing her drawings he'd made and stories he'd written in halting, uneven letters. He started sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued him for months. And Caleb found himself watching Evelyn more than was probably appropriate, watching the way she moved through his house, the way she smiled at Ben, the way she stood on the porch in the evenings and looked out at the mountains as if memorizing the view. He told himself it was just gratitude, relief that his nephew was finally healing, that his house was finally becoming a home again. But late at night, lying in his bed and hearing her soft footsteps in the room down the hall, he admitted to himself that it was more than that. He was beginning to care for her, not as an employee, not as help, but as a person. This fierce, sad, strong woman who'd arrived with nothing and was giving them everything. It terrified him. 3 weeks after Evelyn's arrival, Caleb came in from the barn to find her on a ladder, trying to fix a shutter that had come loose. She was stretching up on her toes, reaching for the hinge, and the ladder wobbled dangerously. "Evelyn!" he shouted, crossing the yard in 3 strides. "Get down from there!" She startled at his voice. The ladder swayed, and for one heart-stopping moment, Caleb thought she was going to fall. But she caught her balance, climbed down carefully, and turned to face him with fire in her eyes. "I had it under control," she said. "You were about to break your neck," he shot back. "If you need something fixed, you ask me. You don't risk yourself on unstable ladders." "You can't do everything, Caleb. You're already working from dawn to dusk trying to keep this ranch running. I can handle a simple repair." It was the first time she'd used his given name without prompting, and something about it, combined with the fear he'd felt seeing her wobble on that ladder, made his temper flare. "You think I brought you here to risk your safety?" he demanded. "You think I want to watch another person get hurt on this property because I wasn't paying attention?" "I think you can't protect everyone from everything," she said, her voice rising to match his. "I think you're carrying enough weight without adding me to the burden. I'm not fragile, Caleb. I won't break." "You could have fallen," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You could have been hurt, and it would have been my fault for not maintaining the property better, for not being here to help." "It wouldn't have been your fault," Evelyn interrupted. "Just like Thomas's death wasn't your fault. Just like everything that's happened wasn't your fault. You can't save everyone. You can't prevent every tragedy. Sometimes things just happen, and all you can do is survive them." They stood facing each other in the yard, breathing hard, and Caleb realized with sudden clarity that they weren't really arguing about the ladder. They were arguing about guilt and responsibility and the weight of all the things they couldn't control. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I can't lose anyone else. Not Ben, not—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Not me," Evelyn finished softly. "I know, I understand, but you have to let me help, Caleb. You have to let me be strong, not because I don't need protection, but because I do. Because the only way I know how to survive is to keep moving, keep working, keep being useful. If you wrap me in cotton wool and treat me like I'm breakable, I will break. Do you understand?" He looked at her, this woman who'd survived losing everything, who'd walked through hell and somehow emerged still fighting, and he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, "but promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll ask for help when you need it." "I promise," she said, "if you promise the same." They shook on it, their hands clasping firmly in the autumn afternoon, and when they let go, something had shifted again. They'd fought and found their way through it. They'd spoken truths that needed speaking. They were learning each other, learning how to be partners in this strange arrangement they'd created. That night, after Ben had gone to bed, Caleb found Evelyn on the porch, wrapped in her new shawl, staring out at the stars. "Cold out here," he said, joining her. "But beautiful," she replied. "I've never seen so many stars. In Philadelphia, there were too many lights, too many buildings. Here, it's like the whole universe is on display." They stood in silence for a while, shoulders almost but not quite touching. "Thank you," Caleb said finally. "For staying, for helping with Ben, for bringing life back to this house. I know I don't say it enough, but I'm grateful." "You're welcome," Evelyn said. "And thank you for giving me a place to land, for seeing past the rags and the desperation, for giving me a chance." "I didn't see past them," Caleb said honestly. "I saw them clearly, but I also saw you, and that mattered more." She turned to look at him, and in the starlight, her face was soft and open in a way he'd never seen before. "I was so scared when I got off that train," she admitted. "Scared that you'd take one look at me and send me back. Scared that I'd finally found a place to rest and it would be snatched away. But you didn't send me back. You let me stay. You let me work. You let me matter." "You do matter," Caleb said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "More than you know." They stood together under the stars, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. And for the first time since his brother died, Caleb let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be all right. The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains white in mid-October and turning the morning air sharp enough to cut. Evelyn woke to find frost patterns on her bedroom window, delicate as lace, and when she went downstairs, she discovered Caleb had already stoked the fire to blazing. He stood at the stove, attempting to make coffee, his movements stiff from the cold. "Let me," she said softly, and he stepped aside without argument. They'd learned this dance over the past month, when to push, when to yield, when to simply work together in comfortable silence. "Winter comes fast here," Caleb said, warming his hands around the cup she handed him. "Another few weeks and we'll have real snow. I need to get the barn roof finished before then, and we'll need to lay in more supplies. Wood, mostly. Food stores are good thanks to you, but we'll need enough firewood to last through March." "I can help," Evelyn offered. "With the wood splitting, I mean. I'm stronger than I look." He studied her in the lamplight, and she knew what he was seeing. She'd filled out in the weeks since her arrival, her cheeks no longer hollow, her frame no longer skeletal. Good food and steady work had begun to restore what months of poverty had stripped away. "I know you are," he said, "but I'd rather you focus on getting the house ready for winter. The windows need better sealing, and those curtains you've been sewing will help keep the heat in. Besides, someone needs to make sure Ben keeps up with his lessons even when we're snowed in." Ben had become her dedicated student, eager and quick to learn despite the gaps in his early education. Every afternoon they sat together at the table, working through readers and arithmetic problems, and Evelyn marveled at how hungry the boy was for knowledge, for stories, for understanding the world beyond the ranch. "He's bright," she'd told Caleb one evening. "Remarkably so. With proper schooling, he could go to university someday." The look on Caleb's face had been worth everything, pride mixed with wonder, as if the possibility had never occurred to him that this quiet, wounded boy might have a future beyond the ranch. Now, as they prepared breakfast together in the pre-dawn darkness, Evelyn found herself thinking about futures in ways she hadn't allowed herself to in years. She'd spent so long focused on mere survival that the idea of planning beyond the next day, the next week, felt dangerously hopeful. "Caleb," she said carefully, cracking eggs into the pan, "what happens when winter ends?" He was quiet for a long moment. "What do you mean?" "I mean our arrangement. You hired me to help with Ben and the house. The house is in order now. Ben is thriving. When spring comes and the ranch work picks up again, will you still need me here?" She kept her eyes on the eggs, not daring to look at him, afraid of what she might see in his face. In the weeks since her arrival, this place had become more than just shelter. It had become home. Ben had become like the son she'd never had. And Caleb had become something she couldn't quite name, something that made her heart beat faster when he walked into a room, something that kept her awake at night wondering if he felt even a fraction of what she was beginning to feel. "Evelyn," Caleb said, and his voice was rough. "Look at me." She turned slowly, the spatula still in her hand, and found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. "No," she whispered, "but I also don't want to overstay my welcome. I don't want to be a burden when you don't need—" "I need you," he interrupted, and the words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. "Ben needs you. This house needs you. I'm not asking you to leave, Evelyn. I'm asking you to stay. Not just through winter. Not just until the work is done. I'm asking you to stay for good." Her heart hammered in her chest. "As your housekeeper? As whatever you want to be," he said. "As Ben's teacher. As the heart of this home. As—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words, then pushed forward. "As my wife, if you'd be willing. Not because of obligation or necessity, but because I'm tired of pretending this is just an arrangement. Because when I see you with Ben, when I come home and smell your bread baking, when I hear you singing while you work, I feel something I thought died with Thomas. I feel hope. I feel peace. I feel like maybe I could be happy again." Evelyn's hands were shaking. "Caleb, I don't have anything to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no connections, no—" "You have yourself," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken her first night here. "That's everything." "People in town already talk," she said. "Mrs. Henderson and her whispers about impropriety. If we married, they'd say I trapped you, that I came here with designs on becoming Mrs. Rourke. Let them say whatever they want," Caleb said fiercely. "I don't give a damn what Mrs. Henderson thinks. I care about what happens in this house, with this family. I care about you, Evelyn, more than I thought I could care about anyone again." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written plain on his weathered face. This wasn't pity or convenience. This was real. This man who'd been hurt and hardened by loss was offering her his heart, asking her to take the same risk he was taking. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I told myself this was just work, just survival. But somewhere between teaching Ben his letters and mending your shirts and learning how you take your coffee, I started to care. I started to hope. And it terrifies me because I've lost everyone I've ever loved, and I don't know if I could survive losing you too." Caleb crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm, calloused from years of ranch work, and his grip was steady and sure. "I can't promise we won't face hardship," he said. "I can't promise the ranch won't fail, or that winters won't be brutal, or that life won't throw us more grief. But I can promise I'll be here. I'll stand beside you through whatever comes. I won't leave you to face things alone." Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need shelter or security, but because I want to build a life with you. Because I want to be Ben's mother and your wife and part of this family." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she buried her face in his chest and breathed in the scent of him. Wood smoke and leather, and something indefinably Caleb. They stood together in the kitchen as the sun began to rise, 2 people who'd been broken finding wholeness in each other's arms. The sound of small feet on the stairs made them pull apart. Ben appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, looking between them with wide eyes. "What's happening?" he asked. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged a glance, and then Caleb knelt down so he was at the boy's level. "Ben," he said, "how would you feel about Miss Ward staying here permanently? About her becoming part of our family?" The boy's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? She's not leaving?" "Not if she doesn't want to," Caleb said. Ben turned to Evelyn, hope and joy warring on his features. "You're staying? Forever?" "Forever," Evelyn confirmed, and found herself laughing through tears as Ben launched himself at her, wrapping his thin arms around her waist in a fierce hug. "I told Uncle Caleb you'd stay," Ben said, his voice muffled against her dress. "I told him you belonged here." "You were right," Evelyn said, running her fingers through his hair. "I do belong here, with both of you." They decided on a simple wedding, just the 3 of them and the traveling minister who came through Iron Creek once a month. Caleb wanted to marry her immediately, but Evelyn insisted on waiting until Reverend Walsh's next visit in 2 weeks. She wanted time to make herself a proper dress, she said, and to prepare a decent wedding meal. The truth was she needed time to believe it was real, to let herself absorb the magnitude of what was happening. She was going to be a wife again, a mother in everything but biology. She was going to have a family and a home and a future that stretched beyond mere survival. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with quiet joy and nervous anticipation. Evelyn sewed herself a dress from the softest fabric she'd found in town, a deep green wool that brought out the color in her eyes. It was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and long sleeves, modest enough for a ranch wedding but beautiful enough to make her feel like a bride. Ben appointed himself the keeper of wedding plans, asking questions about flowers and food and whether there would be cake. His excitement was infectious, and Evelyn found herself laughing more in those 2 weeks than she had in years. Caleb threw himself into finishing the barn roof and splitting enough firewood to last 3 winters, working with the focused intensity of a man trying to prove his worth. Evelyn would watch him from the kitchen window, seeing the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he swung the axe, and feel a flutter in her stomach that was equal parts nervousness and anticipation. They hadn't discussed the physical aspects of marriage, both of them too proper or too nervous to broach the subject directly. But Evelyn had been married before, knew what was expected, what would happen on their wedding night. The thought filled her with a mixture of fear and longing that she didn't quite know how to navigate. One afternoon, a week before the wedding, she was hanging laundry when a wagon rolled up to the house. A woman climbed down, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and keen blue eyes. She wore practical men's trousers and a worn jacket, and she moved with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly who she was. "You must be Evelyn Ward," the woman said, extending a weathered hand. "I'm Margaret Sullivan. I run the ranch 3 miles east of here. Heard Caleb Rourke finally found himself some decent help." Evelyn shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's a pleasure." "Just Margaret. Mrs. Sullivan was my mother-in-law, and I never liked her much." The woman's eyes were sharp and assessing, but not unkind. "I also heard you're marrying him next week. That true?" "It is," Evelyn said, lifting her chin slightly, prepared for judgment or warnings. But Margaret just laughed, a big booming sound that startled a crow from the nearby fence post. "About damn time someone civilized that man. He's been running around like a wounded bear since his brother died. You good to him?" "I try to be," Evelyn said carefully. "And he good to you? Respectful? Doesn't drink or raise his hand?" "He's been nothing but kind and honorable." Margaret nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because if he wasn't, you'd come tell me, and I'd ride over here and set him straight. Out here, women look after women. Remember that. You ever need anything, advice, help, or just another female to talk to when the men are being particularly stupid, you come find me. Understand?" Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest. She'd been so focused on Caleb and Ben that she hadn't realized how much she'd missed female friendship, female solidarity. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." "I brought you something," Margaret said, reaching into her wagon and pulling out a wrapped bundle. "Wedding present. Go on, open it." Evelyn unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautiful quilt, hand-stitched with intricate patterns in blues and greens and golds. It was clearly old but lovingly maintained, each stitch perfect, each square telling a story. "It was my grandmother's," Margaret said. "Brought it west from Kentucky in 1840. She gave it to me on my wedding day, said it would keep me warm through Montana winters and remind me that women are stronger than any storm. I want you to have it." Margaret, I can't possibly. This is a family heirloom, and you're going to be family," Margaret said firmly. "Neighbors are family out here, Evelyn. We don't survive these winters alone. We survive them together, so you take that quilt, and you remember that you're not alone. Not anymore." Evelyn clutched the quilt to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Margaret stayed for coffee and conversation, regaling Evelyn with stories about the early days in Montana Territory, about surviving blizzards and cattle rustlers and husbands who thought they knew everything. By the time she left, Evelyn felt like she'd gained not just a neighbor, but a friend, an ally, someone who understood the particular challenges of being a woman in this hard, beautiful land. That night, Evelyn spread the quilt across her bed and traced the patterns with her fingers. Each square represented a life, a story, a connection stretching back through generations. Soon it would be part of her story too, warming the bed she'd share with Caleb, covering the family they were building from broken pieces. The night before the wedding, Caleb asked Evelyn to walk with him. They left Ben with Margaret Sullivan, who'd insisted on taking the boy for the night to give them time to prepare, and they walked out across the ranch as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I wanted to show you something," Caleb said, leading her to a small rise overlooking the property. From here you could see the house with its repaired roof and gleaming windows, the barn standing strong, the fences stretching into the distance, the cattle grazing peacefully in the pasture. When my parents first came here, this was nothing but grassland and hope, Caleb said. They built everything from scratch, the house, the barn, the life they wanted. Then Thomas nearly destroyed it with his grief. And I thought maybe some things were just too broken to fix, that maybe this place was cursed to fall apart no matter how hard I worked. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. But then you came, he continued. You arrived in rags with nothing but yourself, and somehow you've helped me rebuild everything. Not just the house or the ranch, but the hope. The belief that maybe broken things can be made whole again, that maybe there's a future worth working toward. You did the same for me, Evelyn said softly. I was so lost, Caleb. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a purpose beyond just surviving the day. You gave me that back. You and Ben, you gave me a reason to hope again. I need you to know something, Caleb said, and his voice was serious, almost urgent. Tomorrow, when we marry, it won't be because I need a housekeeper or because Ben needs a mother, though God knows both those things are true. It'll be because I love you, Evelyn. I didn't mean to, didn't think I could after losing so much, but I do. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make this house feel like a home. I love how you treat Ben like he's precious. I love your stubbornness and your determination and the way you hum while you cook. I love you. And I wanted you to know that before we speak vows in front of God and Reverend Walsh. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She'd hoped he cared for her, had seen evidence of it in 100 small ways. But she hadn't expected this raw, honest declaration of love. I love you too, she said, and the words felt like freedom. I love your steadiness and your honor and the way you care for Ben even though you're terrified of failing him. I love how hard you work and how you never complain, and the way you look at me sometimes like I'm something precious. I was so afraid to love again after losing Edward, after losing everything, but you made me brave enough to try. He kissed her then, tentative and sweet, his lips warm against hers in the cooling evening air. It was nothing like the kisses she'd shared with Edward. Those had been the kisses of youth and easy joy. This was the kiss of two people who'd been broken and were choosing to be whole together, who'd survived loss and were daring to love again despite knowing how much it could cost them. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he said, tomorrow you'll be my wife. Tomorrow, she agreed, and every day after. They stood together on the rise as the stars emerged one by one, and Evelyn felt a peace so profound it almost frightened her. She'd traveled so far from that desperate woman who'd stepped off the train in rags. She'd found not just shelter, but home, not just work, but purpose, not just survival, but love. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn morning that promised winter was coming, but wasn't quite here yet. Margaret arrived early with Ben, who was practically vibrating with excitement, and shooed Caleb out of the house so Evelyn could dress in peace. Let me help, Margaret said, and her capable hands made quick work of the buttons down the back of Evelyn's green dress. She'd woven wildflowers, the last of the season, into Evelyn's hair, and when Evelyn looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, healthy, loved. You're beautiful, Ben breathed, appearing in the doorway. Uncle Caleb's going to be so surprised. Where's your uncle? Evelyn asked. Getting dressed in the barn, Ben said, grinning. He kept trying to fix his hair and muttering about looking proper. Margaret told him to stop fussing or she'd cut it all off. Evelyn laughed, picturing Caleb's nervousness, finding comfort in knowing he was as anxious as she was. Reverend Walsh arrived at noon, a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd been traveling the circuit for 30 years. They gathered in the main room of the house, just the 5 of them, small and intimate and perfect. Caleb stood by the fireplace in his Sunday best, his hair slicked back with water, his hands clasped in front of him. When Evelyn entered the room, his eyes went wide and something tender crossed his face. You look beautiful, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. So do you, she replied, and meant it. He'd never looked more handsome than he did right then, nervous and honest and absolutely sincere. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony with a prayer, his voice gentle but carrying. Then he turned to them, his eyes kind. "Marriage is not just a legal contract or a social convention," he said. "It's a sacred covenant, a promise made before God, and witnesses that you will stand together through whatever comes. It requires courage and commitment and the willingness to put another's welfare alongside your own. Caleb, Evelyn, do you both come to this marriage freely and with open hearts?" "We do," they said in unison. The Reverend smiled. "Then let us proceed. Caleb Rourke, do you take Evelyn Ward to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, protect her, and stand by her side through all the days of your life?" Caleb's eyes never left Evelyn's face. "I do," he said firmly, "with everything I am." "Evelyn Ward, do you take Caleb Rourke to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, support him, and stand by his side through all the days of your life?" Evelyn's voice was steady and sure. "I do, with all my heart." "The rings, please," Reverend Walsh said, and Ben stepped forward importantly, holding out 2 simple gold bands that Caleb had bought in town the week before. Caleb took one ring and slipped it onto Evelyn's finger, his hand steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "With this ring I thee wed. All that I have I share with you. All that I am I give to you." Evelyn took the other ring and placed it on Caleb's finger, feeling the weight of the moment, the magnitude of the promise they were making. "With this ring I thee wed. All that I have I share with you. All that I am I give to you. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and Almighty God," Reverend Walsh pronounced, "I declare you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." And he did, right there in the house that was now theirs, with Ben cheering and Margaret wiping her eyes and Reverend Walsh beaming. He kissed her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never thought to pray, like she was hope and home and everything good in the world. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Evelyn realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this happy, this certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Margaret insisted on preparing the wedding meal while Caleb and Evelyn took a moment alone on the porch. They stood together in the afternoon sunlight, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, watching the land stretch out before them. "Mrs. Rourke," Caleb said, testing out the name. "Evelyn Rourke." "It sounds right," Evelyn said, "like it was always meant to be my name." "No regrets?" he asked softly. She turned to face him, placing her hand over his heart. "Not a single one." "You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said, "that you had to suffer so much before you came here." "Maybe I needed to suffer," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "Maybe I needed to lose everything to appreciate what I have now. To understand how precious this is, you and Ben and this life we're building. If things had been easy, I might have taken it for granted, but I won't. I'll treasure every day, Caleb, I promise you that." He kissed her forehead, tender and reverent. "We'll treasure it together." The wedding celebration was simple but joyful. Margaret had roasted a chicken and made biscuits and brought a cake she'd baked that morning. They ate and laughed and told stories, and Ben entertained them with his best attempts at adult conversation, making everyone laugh with his earnest observations. As the sun began to set, Margaret and Reverend Walsh prepared to leave, giving the new couple their privacy. Margaret hugged Evelyn fiercely. "You did good, girl," she whispered. "Real good. He's a fine man, and you're going to be happy here. I know it." "Thank you," Evelyn whispered back, "for everything. For accepting me, for being my friend." "That's what neighbors do," Margaret said. "Now you go be a wife to that man, and don't worry about anything else tonight." After they left, Ben hugged both Caleb and Evelyn goodnight and headed upstairs to bed, leaving them alone in the main room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and suddenly the air felt charged with anticipation and nervousness. "Evelyn," Caleb said, and she heard the uncertainty in his voice. "I want you to know that I don't expect, that is, we can take things slow. I know this is all happening fast, and if you need time—" She crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "Caleb, I've been married before. I know what marriage means. And I'm ready. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be. Because you're my husband now, and I want to be your wife in every way. Relief and desire flickered across his face. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said, and rose on her toes to kiss him. This kiss was different from the ones before, deeper, more urgent, filled with promise and permission. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her chest. Come with me, he said softly, and led her upstairs to the room that was now theirs, no longer his alone, but a space they would share, a bed where they would sleep and wake together for all the days to come. The room was simple, but Evelyn had added touches over the past weeks. Curtains at the window, a quilt on the bed, fresh linens and the scent of lavender from sachets she'd made. Now, with Margaret's grandmother's quilt spread across the bed, it looked like a sanctuary. Caleb lit the lamp on the bedside table, and in the warm glow they undressed each other slowly, tenderly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. He was patient and careful, mindful of her nervousness, and when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms beneath the wedding quilt, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I love you, he murmured into her hair. I love you too, she replied, and felt his arms tighten around her. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its mate. Inside, two people who'd been broken had become whole, had built something new from the ashes of their losses. Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was home at last, that she belonged here, that she was loved. And in the room down the hall, Ben Rourke slept peacefully for the first time since his father died, knowing that his family was complete again, that he had an uncle who cared and an aunt who loved him, and that maybe, finally, everything was going to be all right. Winter arrived with a vengeance 3 weeks after the wedding, bringing snow that piled high against the barn and winds that howled through the valley like wounded animals. Evelyn woke on the first morning of the blizzard to find Caleb already dressed, pulling on his heavy coat in the pre-dawn darkness. "Where are you going?" she asked, sitting up and wrapping the quilt around her shoulders against the cold that had seeped into even their bedroom. "Cattle," he said grimly. "They'll try to drift with the wind, end up scattered or worse. I need to get them closer to the barn, into the sheltered pasture." "I'm coming with you," Evelyn said, throwing back the covers. "Evelyn, it's dangerous out there. The visibility is almost nothing, and the cold is the same cold you'll be facing," she interrupted, already reaching for her warmest dress. "You said yourself you need help. 2 sets of hands are better than 1, and I'm not letting you go out there alone." He looked like he wanted to argue, but they'd been married long enough now that he recognized the set of her jaw, the determination in her eyes. "Ben stays inside," he said finally. "He keeps the fires going and the coffee hot." "Agreed," Evelyn said. They woke Ben and explained the situation. The boy nodded solemnly, understanding the seriousness even at his young age. "I'll keep everything ready," he promised. "You be careful." Outside, the world had transformed into something alien and hostile. Snow fell so thick that Evelyn could barely see Caleb 3 feet in front of her. The wind cut through her layers of clothing like they were nothing, and within minutes her face felt frozen, her fingers numb despite her gloves. "Stay close to me," Caleb shouted over the wind. "Hold on to my coat. If we get separated, head back to the house and don't try to find me. Understand?" She nodded, gripping the back of his heavy coat with one hand while the other clutched the rope he'd tied around both their waists, a lifeline in case the visibility got even worse. They pushed through the snow toward the pasture where the cattle should have been, and Evelyn felt fear rise in her throat. This was the Montana winter Margaret had warned her about, the kind that killed the unprepared, the unlucky, the foolish. But Caleb moved with purpose and confidence, reading the land even through the white curtain of snow, and she trusted him to get them through. The cattle were exactly where he'd predicted, huddled together in the far corner of the pasture, their backs to the wind, snow already piling on their dark forms. Getting them moving was brutal work. Evelyn's voice went hoarse from shouting, her legs ached from pushing through knee-deep drifts, and her hands felt like they might never be warm again. But slowly, painfully, they drove the herd toward the sheltered area near the barn, where the building and surrounding trees would break the worst of the wind. "That's the last of them," Caleb finally shouted, and Evelyn saw the relief in his eyes even through the snow caking his eyelashes. "Let's get inside before we freeze to death." The walk back to the house felt twice as long as the walk out. Evelyn's legs were shaking with exhaustion and cold, and several times she stumbled in the deep snow. Each time, Caleb was there, his hand steadying her, his presence keeping her moving forward. When they finally burst through the door, Ben had the fire roaring and coffee boiling on the stove. He took one look at their snow-covered, half-frozen forms and ran to help. "Get those wet clothes off," he ordered with an authority beyond his years. "I've got blankets warming by the fire and hot coffee ready." Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't manage the buttons on her coat. Caleb's weren't much better, but between them they managed to strip down to dry underlayers and wrap themselves in the warmed blankets. The coffee burned going down, but the heat was glorious, spreading through Evelyn's frozen core like salvation. "That was foolish," Caleb said after a long silence, but his voice held no anger. "We could have died out there." "But we didn't," Evelyn replied, "and the cattle are safe. That's what matters." "You matter," he said fiercely, "more than any damn cattle. If something had happened to you, something could have happened to you if you'd gone alone," she interrupted. "We're partners now, Caleb, in everything. That includes the dangerous things, the hard things. You don't get to protect me from every risk while taking them all on yourself." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head with something that might have been exasperation or admiration, or both. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met."
"I learned from the most stubborn man," she shot back, and despite everything, the cold, the danger, the exhaustion, they both smiled. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside while the wind howled and the snow piled higher and higher. On the second day, they woke to find drifts reaching halfway up the windows, transforming the house into a cave of dim, snow-filtered light. Caleb had to dig a path to the barn just to feed the animals, and even that short journey was treacherous. But inside, the house was warm and bright. Evelyn cooked while Ben did his lessons at the table and Caleb worked on mending tack and tools. They told stories by the fire in the evenings, played simple games, taught Ben card tricks that Caleb's mother had taught him as a boy. And at night, Evelyn lay in Caleb's arms and listened to the storm rage outside, grateful for the walls around them, the warmth of their bed, the safety they'd built together. On the fourth day, the storm broke. They woke to silence. No wind, no snow, just the profound quiet of a world buried in white. When Caleb opened the door, they found themselves looking at a wall of snow that had drifted against the house. It took him an hour to dig them out, but when they finally emerged, the sight stole Evelyn's breath. Everything was transformed. The ranch lay beneath a blanket of pristine white. The mountains in the distance gleaming like they'd been carved from ice. The sky so blue it hurt to look at. The sun glinted off the snow, making everything sparkle like the world was covered in diamonds. "It's beautiful," Evelyn breathed. "It's deadly," Caleb said, but there was appreciation in his voice too. "Come on, we need to check the cattle, make sure none of them are in trouble." They spent the day digging out, checking on animals, assessing damage. They'd lost 3 chickens. The cold had been too much for them despite the insulated coop, but the cattle had survived. The barn was intact, and the house had weathered the storm without issue. All things considered, they'd been lucky. Over the next weeks, winter settled in for the long haul. More storms came, though none quite as fierce as that first blizzard. The ranch became a world unto itself, isolated by snow and distance from the nearest neighbors. They saw no one, spoke to no one outside their small family, and somehow that made their bond even stronger. Ben thrived under Evelyn's teaching, advancing through his readers at a pace that astounded both adults. He showed a particular aptitude for numbers, able to calculate in his head with impressive speed and accuracy. In the evenings, after supper, Evelyn would work on her sewing while Caleb and Ben played chess on a board that had belonged to Caleb's father. Watching them bent over the board, their faces serious and focused, Evelyn felt a contentment so profound it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. This was family. This was home.
This was what she'd thought she'd lost forever when Edward died and creditors stripped her life bare. One evening in late January, when Ben had gone up to bed and they sat together by the fire, Caleb reached over and took Evelyn's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, and there was something serious in his tone that made her set aside her sewing. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when Ben gets older, when he's ready to go to school, real school, maybe even university like you mentioned. The ranch is doing better than it has in years, thanks to you and your management of the household funds. We're not rich, but we're stable. I want to start setting aside money for Ben's education. I want him to have choices, opportunities that I never had." Evelyn's heart swelled with love for this man who worked himself to exhaustion every day, but still thought about his nephew's future, who wanted to give the boy every chance despite his own limited education. "That's a wonderful idea," she said, "and I think we can manage it if we're careful. I've been keeping accounts and there's definitely room in the budget for savings." "You've been keeping accounts?" Caleb looked surprised. "Someone has to," Evelyn said. "You're brilliant with cattle and land management, but arithmetic isn't your strongest skill. I hope you don't mind that I took it over." "Mind? I'm grateful. That's one more thing I don't have to worry about." He paused, then continued. "There's something else. I want to expand the herd this spring, maybe buy breeding stock from the Sullivan Ranch. Margaret runs good cattle, and if we can improve our stock, we can charge better prices. But it would mean taking on some risk, using our savings for the investment." "How much risk?" Evelyn asked, her practical side immediately assessing the situation. "Moderate. If we have a bad season, drought, disease, market crash, we could lose everything. But if things go well, we could triple our income within 3 years." Evelyn was quiet, thinking. She'd lived through losing everything once, knew the terror of poverty and desperation. The thought of risking their stability made her stomach clench, but she also understood that sometimes you had to take calculated risks to build something better. "What does your instinct tell you?" she asked. "Not your fear or your hope, but your gut feeling as a rancher who knows this land and this business." Caleb was silent for a long moment. "My gut says it's the right move. The market is strong, the land can support more cattle, and Margaret's stock is proven. If we're going to make this ranch truly prosperous, this is how we do it." "Then we do it," Evelyn said decisively. "We take the risk, together." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You're sure? I know how hard you've worked to make us stable, to build our savings. And I'll work just as hard to make this expansion successful," she said. "But you're right. This is how we build a real future for Ben, for ourselves. We can't live in fear of losing everything. We have to have faith that we're strong enough to weather whatever comes." "When did you get so brave?" Caleb asked softly. "When I married a man who made me believe I was worth something," Evelyn replied. "When I found a home worth fighting for." As winter slowly released its grip and the first hints of spring began to show, snowdrops pushing through melting drifts, birds returning to nest in the barn rafters, the ranch began to wake from its hibernation. Caleb and Evelyn made plans, sketched out budgets, discussed strategies for the expansion. Ben grew restless with cabin fever, eager to be outside again, to help with the spring work. In early March, just as the roads became passable again, Margaret Sullivan arrived with unexpected news. "There's a family passing through," she said, accepting the coffee Evelyn offered. "Immigrants from Sweden, heading west to Seattle. But they've run into trouble. Wagon broke down. They're low on supplies, and the wife is pregnant, due any day by the looks of her. Reverend Walsh is trying to find them shelter until the baby comes and they can repair their wagon. I thought maybe—" "They can stay here," Evelyn said immediately, before Margaret even finished the sentence. Caleb looked surprised but not disapproving. "Evelyn, are you sure? We don't know these people." "We don't need to know them," Evelyn said. "They need help, and we can provide it. That's enough." She turned to Margaret. "Tell Reverend Walsh to bring them here. We have room." The Anderson family arrived that afternoon. Carl and Ingrid and their 3 young children, all of them exhausted and worried, their belongings packed in a damaged wagon. Ingrid was heavily pregnant, her face pale with pain that she was trying to hide, her hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. Evelyn took one look at her and knew. "How far apart are the pains?" she asked. Ingrid's eyes widened. "You know, I didn't want to say, didn't want to be burden, but they started this morning, maybe every hour." "You're not a burden," Evelyn said firmly. "You're a mother about to have a baby, and you're going to do it somewhere warm and safe. Ben, help Mr. Anderson get their family settled in the spare room. Caleb, ride to get Margaret. Tell her we need her experience. Carl, your wife is going to be fine, but we need to prepare." The house erupted into controlled chaos. Evelyn had never delivered a baby, but she'd been present when her sister gave birth, had helped her mother care for laboring women in their church community. She knew the basics, knew what needed to be done. And as Ingrid's labor progressed through the afternoon and into the evening, Evelyn found herself drawing on reserves of strength and courage she didn't know she possessed. Margaret arrived and took charge with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who'd delivered half the babies in 3 counties. She assessed Ingrid, declared everything progressing normally, and set Evelyn to boiling water and preparing linens while she coached the laboring mother through contractions. The Anderson children huddled with Ben in the main room, their eyes wide and frightened, and Carl paced like a caged animal, his face haggard with worry. Caleb stayed with him, offering quiet reassurance in his steady way, while Evelyn moved between the bedroom and the kitchen, fetching what Margaret needed, offering what comfort she could. Just after midnight, a baby's cry pierced the air, strong and healthy and absolutely beautiful. Margaret emerged from the bedroom, her sleeves rolled up, her face tired but triumphant. "You have a daughter," she told Carl, "a strong, healthy daughter, and your wife did wonderfully. They're both fine." The relief on Carl's face was so profound that Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what mattered, she thought. This moment of new life, of a family kept safe, of help offered when it was desperately needed. This was what it meant to be part of a community, to be something more than just yourself. The Anderson family stayed for 2 weeks while Ingrid recovered and Carl repaired their wagon. In that time, the house that had been quiet for months suddenly rang with children's laughter and conversation in a mix of Swedish and English. The older Anderson children played with Ben, teaching him Swedish words while he taught them English phrases. Ingrid and Evelyn bonded over the care of the new baby, a tiny girl named Astrid, with a dusting of blonde hair and her mother's blue eyes. "You saved us," Ingrid said one afternoon as they sat together by the fire, Astrid sleeping peacefully in her arms. "We had nowhere to go, no one to help. If you hadn't taken us in—" "Someone took me in when I had nowhere to go," Evelyn said simply. "We help each other. That's how we survive out here." When the Andersons finally left, continuing their journey west with a repaired wagon and renewed spirits, the house felt strangely empty. But they'd left something behind, a reminder that this ranch, this home, was more than just a place for the 3 of them. It was a place that could offer shelter, that could be a beacon of hope for those who needed it. "You were incredible," Caleb told Evelyn that night as they lay in bed. "The way you took charge, helped Ingrid, made that family feel safe and welcome. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." "I was terrified the entire time," Evelyn admitted. "What if something had gone wrong? What if I'd made a mistake?" "But you didn't," Caleb said. "You trusted yourself, trusted what you knew, and you helped bring a new life into the world. That's extraordinary." Evelyn nestled closer to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body against hers. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about children, about whether you'd want—" She felt him go still, then his arms tightened around her. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I don't know yet," she said. "It's too early to be certain. But my monthly courses are late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings, and I thought you should know that it's possible, that we might be expecting." For a moment, Caleb didn't speak, and Evelyn felt a flutter of worry. Maybe he didn't want more children. Maybe the thought of a baby terrified him after what had happened to Thomas's wife. "A baby," he breathed finally, and his voice was filled with such wonder and joy that all Evelyn's fears evaporated. "We might have a baby. Evelyn, I don't even have words. It would be terrifying and wonderful," Evelyn finished for him. "And we'll face it together, just like everything else." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly,
and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "When will you know for certain?" he asked. "Another few weeks, probably. I don't want to say anything to Ben until we're sure. But Caleb—" She paused, needing him to understand. "I'm scared."
After what happened with Sarah, after seeing how Thomas lost everything when she died in childbirth, I'm terrified of what could happen. I'm scared too, Caleb admitted. But we're not Thomas and Sarah. We have Margaret nearby. We have each other, and we'll be careful every step of the way. And Evelyn, his hand came up to cup her face. Even though I'm scared, I'm also happier than I can remember being. The thought of a child with you, a baby that's ours, it's like a dream I never let myself dream. 2 weeks later, Margaret confirmed what they'd both suspected. Evelyn was pregnant, due sometime in late autumn by Margaret's estimation. The older woman gave Evelyn a thorough examination, asked detailed questions about her health history, and finally pronounced her fit and strong. "You're built sturdy," Margaret said with approval. "Good hips, good health. I don't anticipate problems, but we'll keep close watch. You'll come visit me once a month so I can check on you and the baby. And you," she turns to Caleb, who'd been hovering nervously, "you'll make sure she doesn't overwork herself. Pregnant women need rest and good food, and less stress." "I'll make sure," Caleb promised. Telling Ben was one of the happiest moments of Evelyn's life. They sat him down after supper, both of them nervous about how he'd react to the news that their family was about to expand. "Ben," Caleb began, "we have something to tell you, something important and good." The boy looked between them, his expression wary. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," Evelyn said gently. "Sometime in the fall, you're going to have a little brother or sister. What do you think about that?" For a long moment, Ben just stared at them. Then his face broke into the widest smile Evelyn had ever seen. "Really? A real baby? That'll be mine too, kind of." "Not kind of," Caleb said. "Definitely. You'll be a big brother. That's an important job." "Will it be a boy or a girl?" Ben asked. "We won't know until the baby comes," Evelyn said. "Does it matter to you?" Ben thought about it seriously. "No, either way would be good. Can I help take care of it?" "We're counting on it," Evelyn said, pulling him into a hug. "We're going to need your help a lot." That night, after Ben had gone to bed chattering excitedly about names and what he'd teach his new sibling, Caleb and Evelyn stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "I never thought I'd have this," Caleb said quietly. "A wife I love, a nephew who's thriving, a baby on the way. A year ago, I was barely surviving, just trying to keep my head above water and not fail Ben too badly. Now look at us." "You were never failing," Evelyn said. "You were doing the best you could with impossible circumstances. But yes, look at us now. Look at what we've built." She placed his hand on her stomach, still flat, but holding their future, their hope, the physical proof that broken people could come together and create something whole and beautiful. "I love you," Caleb said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You came into my life when everything was falling apart, and you helped me put it back together. You made me believe in futures and families and happiness again." "You did the same for me," Evelyn said. "You saw worth in a woman who arrived in rags. You gave me a chance when I had nothing left to offer but myself. You made me believe I deserved to be loved, to be happy, to have a home." They stood together in the spring darkness, feeling the warmth of the house behind them and the promise of summer ahead. Inside, Ben slept peacefully, dreaming of being a big brother. Around them, the ranch stretched into the darkness, repaired, rebuilt, and ready for whatever came next. And in Evelyn's womb, a tiny life was beginning, a new chapter in a story that had started with desperation and transformation and was becoming something neither of them had dared to hope for. A love story, a family story, a story of redemption and second chances and the courage to keep building even after everything falls apart. The story was far from over, but this chapter, this beautiful, hard-won, precious chapter, was perfect exactly as it was. Spring melted into summer, and with it came the expansion Caleb and Evelyn had planned. The new cattle arrived from Margaret's ranch in early May, 20 head of prime breeding stock that would strengthen their herd and secure their future. Caleb worked from sunrise to sunset, building new fencing, improving the barn, preparing for the additional animals. And Evelyn, despite her growing belly, worked alongside him in every way she could, managing the household accounts, coordinating with suppliers, keeping everything running smoothly. By midsummer, her pregnancy was obvious. Her dresses had to be let out, and eventually she gave up and sewed herself new ones with room to accommodate her expanding waistline. She moved more slowly now, tired more easily, but there was a glow about her that had nothing to do with the physical changes. She was happy, deeply and genuinely happy, in a way she'd never been even in her first marriage. Ben had become fiercely protective of her, insisting on carrying anything heavier than a coffee cup, helping with chores without being asked, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to sew. He talked constantly about the baby, making plans and asking questions that sometimes made the adults laugh and sometimes made them tear up with the sweetness of his excitement. "Do you think the baby will like fishing?" he asked one evening. "Because I'm getting really good at it, and I could teach them." "I'm sure they'll love learning from you," Evelyn said, running her fingers through his hair. "You're going to be a wonderful big brother." In August, when the heat lay heavy over the valley, and Evelyn was large and uncomfortable, struggling to sleep through the hot nights, trouble arrived in the form of 3 men on horseback. Caleb was working in the north pasture when he saw them approaching, and something about the way they rode, casual but purposeful, eyes scanning the property with too much interest, made his instincts prickle. He headed back to the house at a quick stride, arriving just as the men were dismounting in the yard. Evelyn had seen them from the kitchen window and came out onto the porch, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Ben stood beside her, his small face serious. "Afternoon," the lead writer said, touching his hat. He was tall and weathered, with cold eyes that didn't match his polite smile. "Name's Carson. These are my associates, Miller and Dutch. We're looking to buy cattle. Heard you might have some prime stock." "We're not selling," Caleb said flatly, positioning himself between the strangers and his family. Carson's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now don't be hasty. We pay fair prices. Better than fair, even. It'd be a shame to pass up good money." "I said we're not selling," Caleb repeated. "You can move along." Something shifted in Carson's expression, the veneer of politeness cracking slightly. "See, that's not very neighborly. We've come a long way and we don't like wasting time. Maybe you should reconsider." "Maybe you should leave," Evelyn said from the porch, her voice steady despite the fear Caleb could see in her eyes. "You heard my husband. We have nothing to sell you." Miller, a squat man with a scar across his cheek, laughed unpleasantly. "Your husband, that's sweet. You got yourself a pregnant wife and a little boy to protect, Rourke. Makes a man vulnerable, having people he cares about." The threat was unmistakable, and Caleb felt rage surge through him. But before he could respond, a rifle cocked behind the strangers, and Margaret Sullivan's voice rang out clear and hard. "Makes a man smart, too. Smart enough to have neighbors who look out for each other. Now, I suggest you 3 get back on your horses and ride out of here before someone gets hurt." She stood at the edge of the property, her rifle leveled at Carson's chest, her face set in lines of grim determination. And behind her, Caleb could see 2 of her ranch hands, also armed, also watching with cold, steady eyes. Carson's jaw tightened, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he said, swinging back into his saddle. "We'll be back." "You come back and we'll be ready," Margaret said. "Now get off this property before I decide trespassing is reason enough to shoot." The 3 men rode off, and only when they'd disappeared over the ridge did Margaret lower her rifle. She walked toward the house, her ranch hands following, and Caleb saw that her hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you," he said roughly. "How did you know?" "Saw them riding past my property earlier. Didn't like the look of them," Margaret said. "Figured they might be heading here. Good thing I trusted my instincts." She looked at Evelyn, still standing on the porch with one hand pressed to her belly. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Evelyn said, but her voice wavered slightly. "Just frightened. Who were those men?" "Cattle rustlers, most likely," Margaret said grimly. "Been reports of them working the territory, stealing stock, sometimes worse. They scope out ranches, figure out who's vulnerable, then come back at night to take what they want. Sometimes they just take cattle. Sometimes they take more." Caleb felt his blood run cold. The implication was clear. A ranch with a pregnant woman and a child was exactly the kind of vulnerable target these men looked for. "We need to prepare," he said. "If they come back—" "When they come back," Margaret corrected. "Men like that don't give up easy, especially when they've been challenged. We need to be ready." They spent the rest of the day fortifying the ranch. Margaret's hands helped Caleb board up some of the more vulnerable windows, set up better sight lines from the house, and check all the weapons. Evelyn, despite her pregnancy, worked on preparing supplies, extra ammunition, food and water in case they needed to hold out, medical supplies in case someone got hurt. Ben, sensing the seriousness of the situation, stayed quiet and helpful, following instructions without question. As the sun began to set, Margaret and her men prepared to head back to their own ranch. "I'll send someone to check on you tomorrow," she said. "And if you see any sign of trouble tonight, any sign at all, you fire 3 shots in the air. We'll hear it and come running." After they left, Caleb, Evelyn, and Ben ate a quiet supper, the tension in the house palpable. Ben went to bed early without complaint, and Caleb checked and rechecked the locks on the doors, the boards on the windows, the rifle he'd placed by the front door. "Come to bed," Evelyn said finally, when he'd made his 3rd circuit of the house. "You need rest if you're going to stay alert." "I'm not sure I can sleep," he admitted. "Knowing they might come back, knowing you and Ben are in danger because of me—" "Because of us," Evelyn interrupted. "This is our ranch, our family, our life together. We face this together just like everything else." They lay in bed in the darkness, both of them fully clothed, listening to every sound, the wind in the trees, the settling of the house, the distant call of an owl. Caleb held his rifle across his lap, and Evelyn kept her hand in his, her presence a comfort even in the midst of fear. It was just after midnight when they heard it, the soft sound of horses approaching, men speaking in low voices, the creak of the barn door being opened. "They're here," Caleb whispered, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Stay with Ben. Barricade yourselves in his room. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Caleb, please," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please, Evelyn, I need to know you and Ben are safe. I can't think straight if I'm worried about you." She kissed him hard and fast. "Be careful. Come back to us." "Always," he promised. He watched her slip into Ben's room, heard the sound of furniture being moved to block the door, and then he moved downstairs, rifle in hand, every sense on high alert. Through the window, he could see shadows moving in the barn, 3 of them, just as he'd expected. They were going for the cattle first, probably planning to load what they could before dealing with the house. Caleb moved to the front door, raised his rifle, and fired 3 shots into the air, the signal for Margaret. Then he took position behind the heavy table he'd overturned for cover and waited. The shots brought the men running from the barn, but they weren't retreating. They were advancing on the house, weapons drawn. Caleb saw the muzzle flash as one of them fired, heard the bullet thud into the doorframe. "We can do this easy or hard," Carson's voice called out. "Give us what we want and we'll leave you be. Make it difficult and things get ugly." "You're not taking anything from this ranch," Caleb shouted back. "And help is already on the way. You've got maybe 20 minutes before you're surrounded." "20 minutes is plenty of time," Carson said, and Caleb heard the cruel satisfaction in his voice. More shots rang out, and Caleb returned fire, aiming carefully, trying to keep them pinned down. He'd been in the army for 2 years before his father died, and he'd come home to help with the ranch. He knew how to handle a weapon, how to stay calm under fire. But he was 1 man against 3, and they were spreading out, trying to flank the house. A window shattered upstairs, and Caleb's blood ran cold. They were trying multiple entry points, trying to divide his attention. He heard Evelyn scream, not in pain but in fury, and then the boom of a shotgun from upstairs. Evelyn had armed herself, was defending Ben's room, and Caleb felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. His wife, 8 months pregnant, was fighting back while he tried to hold the ground floor. The battle seemed to last forever, but was probably only minutes. Caleb fired until his first rifle was empty, switched to his second, fired again. One of the attackers, Dutch, he thought, went down with a cry, clutching his leg. Carson and Miller kept coming, but their movements were more cautious now, more uncertain. And then, like salvation itself, he heard horses approaching at a gallop, heard Margaret's voice shouting orders, heard the thunder of multiple weapons being cocked and aimed. "Drop your weapons," Margaret commanded, her voice carrying across the yard with absolute authority. "You're surrounded and outgunned. Drop them now or we shoot." For a moment, Caleb thought Carson might be stupid enough to fight. But then he saw the man take in the situation, Margaret and at least 6 ranch hands, all armed, all ready, and reason prevailed over pride. His weapon hit the ground, followed by Miller's. Dutch was already down, groaning and bleeding. "Caleb, you all right in there?" Margaret called. "Fine," he shouted back, his voice rough. "Evelyn and Ben? We're okay?" Evelyn called from upstairs, and Caleb felt his knees go weak with relief. "The baby's okay. We're all okay." 2 of Margaret's hands tied up the would-be rustlers, while another rode for the territorial marshal. Margaret herself came to the door, and Caleb let her in, his hand still shaking with adrenaline and fear. "You did good," she said. "Held them off until help arrived. That takes courage." "Evelyn fought too," Caleb said. "Defended Ben's room with the shotgun. 8 months pregnant, and she—" His voice broke. Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, Ben beside her, both of them pale but unharmed. Caleb took the stairs 3 at a time and pulled them both into his arms, holding them so tight he was afraid he might hurt them, but unable to let go. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "When I heard that shotgun, when I knew you were in danger." "We're fine," Evelyn said, but she was crying now, all the fear and adrenaline finally breaking through. "We're all fine. It's over." The marshal arrived at dawn and took the 3 men into custody. Dutch would need a doctor for his leg. Caleb's bullet had shattered his kneecap, but he'd lived to stand trial. Carson and Miller were wanted in 3 territories for rustling, robbery, and assault. They'd be going to prison for a long time. As the sun rose over the ranch, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Caleb stood on the porch with his arm around Evelyn, watching the marshal's wagon disappear down the road. Ben leaned against them both, exhausted but safe. "I never want to go through anything like that again," Evelyn said quietly. "Neither do I," Caleb agreed. "But if we have to, if danger comes again, I know now that we can handle it together." "You were incredible last night, Evelyn. Terrifying and incredible." "I was protecting our family," she said simply. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Margaret stayed through the morning, helping them clean up the damage, board up the broken window, assess what needed repair. As she was preparing to leave, she pulled Evelyn aside. "You're due soon," she said. "That kind of stress last night, it could bring on labor early. I want you to take it easy the next few weeks. Rest, let Caleb handle things, and if you feel anything at all, you send for me immediately." "I will," Evelyn promised. "And Margaret, thank you for everything. For coming when we needed you, for being there. You saved our lives." "That's what neighbors do," Margaret said, echoing the words Evelyn had spoken months ago. "We look out for each other. That's how we survive out here." The next few weeks passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. The excitement of Ben's upcoming birthday mixed with the nervous expectation of the baby's arrival. Evelyn grew larger and more uncomfortable, finding it hard to sleep, hard to move, hard to do much of anything except wait. Caleb finished the repairs from the attack and strengthened the ranch's defenses, though the threat was gone now. He worked with renewed purpose, knowing he was building something worth protecting, a home worth defending, a future worth fighting for. Ben turned 9 on a crisp September morning, and they celebrated with a cake Evelyn had made despite her exhaustion, with presents they'd carefully saved for. A new fishing rod from Caleb, a set of books from Evelyn, and from Margaret, who joined them for the celebration, a beautiful pocket knife with Ben's initials carved into the handle. "You're almost a man now," Margaret told him seriously. "This knife is a tool and a responsibility. You take care of it, and it'll take care of you." Ben held the knife like it was made of gold, his face shining with pride and joy. And Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes at how much he'd grown, how far they'd all come from that first day when she'd stepped off the train in rags. 2 weeks later, on a golden afternoon when the aspens were turning yellow and the air held the first real bite of autumn, Evelyn's water broke. She was standing at the stove stirring soup for supper when she felt the warm rush down her legs and knew immediately what it meant. The baby was coming 3 weeks earlier than expected, but not dangerously so. "Caleb," she called, proud that her voice stayed steady. "It's time. Send Ben for Margaret."
The next hours were a blur of pain and determination and fear and hope all twisted together. Margaret arrived and took charge with her usual confidence, coaching Evelyn through contractions, checking her progress, offering steady reassurance when the pain became almost unbearable. Caleb stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering words of love and encouragement. She'd thought she might want him to wait outside like most husbands did, but when the time came, she couldn't bear to let him go. She needed his strength, his presence, the reminder of why she was going through this agony. Labor was hard, harder than she'd expected, even knowing what to anticipate. Hours stretched into what felt like years, and there were moments when Evelyn thought she couldn't do it, couldn't push through one more contraction, couldn't survive the tearing pain. "Yes, you can," Margaret said firmly when Evelyn gasped out that she was done, that she couldn't anymore. "You're strong enough for this. You survived losing everything and rebuilt your life from nothing. You fought off cattle rustlers 8 months pregnant. You can absolutely bring this baby into the world. Now push." And she did. She pushed with everything she had, with all the strength she'd developed surviving poverty and loss and desperation, with all the love she felt for Caleb and Ben and this baby she hadn't yet met but already loved with her whole heart. Just as the sun was setting, painting the bedroom in shades of amber and gold, a baby's cry split the air, strong and healthy and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Margaret announced, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the tiny, squirming bundle on Evelyn's chest. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." Evelyn looked down at her daughter, pink and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same brown as her mother's, and felt something shift in her chest, something profound and permanent. "Hello," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." Caleb was crying too, she realized, silent tears running down his weathered face as he looked at his wife and daughter with an expression of such wonder and joy that it made Evelyn's heart ache. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Evelyn, she's absolutely perfect." "Can I come in?" Ben's voice called from outside the door, tentative but eager. "Can I meet the baby?" "Come in," Evelyn called, and the door opened to reveal Ben, his face anxious and excited all at once. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes huge as he looked at the tiny baby in Evelyn's arms. "She's so small," he whispered. "Is she supposed to be that small?" "All babies are small at first," Margaret said, smiling. "She'll grow, and she's lucky to have such a good big brother to help her." "What's her name?" Ben asked. Caleb and Evelyn looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They'd discussed names but never quite decided, wanting to wait until they met the baby to see what fit. "Grace," Evelyn said finally. "Grace Sarah Rourke. After my mother and after Ben's mother. What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Grace. Our daughter, Grace." Ben reached out a tentative finger and touched the baby's tiny hand. Immediately her fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength, and his face lit up like sunrise. "She's holding my hand," he breathed. "She likes me." "Of course she likes you," Evelyn said. "You're her brother." Margaret stayed until she was satisfied that both mother and baby were doing well, then gathered her things to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at the scene. Caleb sitting on the edge of the bed with his arm around Evelyn, Ben curled up beside them, staring at the baby with absolute devotion, little Grace sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "You've built something beautiful here," Margaret said quietly, "something worth all the struggle it took to get here. Congratulations to all of you." After she left, the four of them stayed together as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. They didn't speak much. There didn't seem to be words adequate for what they were all feeling. Instead, they just existed together, this family that had been built from broken pieces, that had survived loss and poverty and danger and had somehow come through it all intact. Grace stirred in Evelyn's arms, made a small mewling sound, and Evelyn shifted to nurse her, marveling at how instinctively the baby knew what to do. Caleb watched with tender fascination, and Ben peppered them with whispered questions about how babies worked, what she could do, when she'd be able to play. "She'll need time to grow," Evelyn said, smiling at his eagerness.
But soon enough, she'll be following you everywhere, wanting to do everything you do. You'll be her hero, Ben." "I'll teach her everything," Ben promised solemnly. "How to fish and ride and do arithmetic and read. I'll make sure she knows all the important stuff." "She's lucky to have you," Caleb said, ruffling the boy's hair. "We all are." That night, after Ben had finally been persuaded to go to his own bed, and Grace was sleeping in the cradle Caleb had built months ago, Evelyn and Caleb lay together in the darkness, listening to their daughter's soft breathing. "A year ago," Caleb said quietly, "I was alone and broken, barely keeping my head above water, certain I'd lost any chance at happiness. And now look at us. A wife I love, 2 children, a ranch that's thriving. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream," Evelyn said. "It's real. It's what we built together, what we fought for, what we earned through all the hard times and fear and struggle. This is our life, Caleb, our family, our future." "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked, "when you stepped off the train in those ragged clothes, looking half-starved and completely exhausted?" "All the time," Evelyn admitted. "I was so scared that day. Scared you'd take one look at me and send me back. Scared I'd finally found a chance and would lose it. Scared I'd never be anything but desperate and poor and alone. And now? Now I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. "I know that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. I know that the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best ones. I know that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about showing up every day, doing the work, building something together one day at a time." Caleb pulled her closer, careful of her sore body, mindful of the exhaustion he knew she must be feeling. "I love you, Evelyn Rourke, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing worth in a woman who arrived with nothing. Thank you for giving me a chance, a home, a family. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for staying," he replied. "Thank you for fighting for us, for being brave enough to build a life here when you had every reason to give up. Thank you for making this house a home." They lay together in the darkness, listening to Grace breathe and the wind whisper through the valley and the timeless sounds of the ranch settling into sleep. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Inside, a family slept, bound together by love and struggle and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built. The months that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Grace was a good baby, healthy and strong, but she still needed constant care, feeding every few hours, diaper changes, comfort when she cried. Evelyn navigated new motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else, learning as she went, accepting help from Margaret when she needed it, finding joy in the tiny moments of Grace's smiles and coos. Ben was an attentive big brother, always wanting to hold the baby, sing to her, show her his drawings and treasures. And Caleb was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Grace to Evelyn for feeding, walking the floor with the baby when she was fussy, staring at her with an expression of such wonder that it made Evelyn fall in love with him all over again every time she saw it. The ranch continued to thrive. The expansion had been wise. The new breeding stock improved the herd, and when they brought cattle to market that fall, they earned nearly double what they had the previous year. The accounts Evelyn kept showed steady growth, enough to keep building their savings for Ben's education, enough to feel secure against whatever challenges might come. Winter arrived again, but this time they were prepared, well stocked with food and firewood, the house weatherproofed, the barn in excellent repair. When the first real blizzard hit in early December, they weathered it easily, gathered around the fire as a family, Caleb reading aloud while Evelyn nursed Grace and Ben practiced his letters on his slate. It was during one of these evenings that Ben looked up from his work and asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Will you tell Grace about how you two met?" he asked. "About how Aunt Evelyn came here with nothing and Uncle Caleb gave her a chance?" Evelyn and Caleb exchanged a glance, and something passed between them, a recognition of how far they'd come, how much their story mattered. "We will," Evelyn said. "When she's old enough to understand, we'll tell her everything. About how I arrived in rags and your uncle saw something in me anyway. About how we built this family from broken pieces. about how love isn't always easy or simple, but it's always worth fighting for. And we'll tell her about you, Caleb added, looking at Ben, about how you were the first one to really accept her mother, how you made this family complete even before Grace arrived. Ben smiled, pleased and a little embarrassed, and went back to his letters. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn sat by the fire working on a quilt she'd started making. A history quilt, she'd decided, with squares representing different moments in their journey. A square of blue fabric from her first dress. A piece of Caleb's old work shirt. Scraps from Ben's outgrown clothes. A bit of Grace's baby blanket. And at the center, a piece of the dress she'd worn when she arrived. Those rags that she'd saved not as a reminder of poverty, but as a testament to survival, to the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. Caleb sat beside her, working on carving a set of wooden animals for Grace, something she could play with when she was older, something made by her father's hands with love and care.
"Are you happy?" he asked suddenly, not looking up from his carving. Evelyn set down her needle and really considered the question. Was she happy? After everything she'd been through, after all the loss and pain and struggle, had she found happiness here in this remote Montana ranch with this quiet, steady man and these two children who'd claimed her heart? Yes, she said finally, and the word felt like truth, like peace, like coming home. I'm happy. Not because everything is perfect or easy, but because we built this together, because every day I wake up and choose to be here, choose to love you, choose to be part of this family. That kind of happiness, the kind you have to work for, the kind that comes after struggle. That's the most real kind there is. Caleb set down his carving and pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. I'm happy too, he said. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. You saved me, Evelyn. You saved all of us. We saved each other, she corrected. That's how this works. That's what family means. Years passed, and the ranch grew along with the family. Ben went off to school in town, then later to university in Helena, studying law like Evelyn had always known he could. But he came back every summer, helping with the ranch work, doting on Grace, and later on her younger sister Rose, born 3 years after Grace, with Caleb's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Grace grew into a spirited, curious girl who asked 1,000 questions and wanted to know everything about everything. She learned to read from her mother, to ride from her father, to fish from Ben, and to be fearless from all of them. The quilt Evelyn had started that winter evening grew over the years. New squares added with each important moment: Ben's graduation, Grace's first steps, Rose's birth, the year the ranch turned its first real profit, the spring Ben came home with a law degree and a fiancée. And through it all, Caleb and Evelyn stood together, partners in every sense of the word, building and maintaining and protecting the life they'd created from nothing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Evelyn back to the rise where he'd proposed, where they'd stood together that autumn evening before their wedding and talked about love and hope and building a future. Do you remember what I said to you that night? He asked, his arm around her waist. The two of them watching the sun set over the ranch that had become so much more than either of them had dreamed. You said you loved me, Evelyn recalled. You said I'd helped you rebuild everything. I was wrong, Caleb said, and when she looked at him in surprise, he smiled. I didn't need you to help me rebuild. I needed you to build something entirely new, something better than what was before. A real family, a real home, a real partnership. You didn't just fix what was broken, Evelyn. You created something that never existed before. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady strength of him, the warmth of his presence, the deep contentment of a love that had been tested and proven true time and again. We created it together, she said. That's the important part. Not that you saved me or I saved you, but that we chose each other, every single day, through everything. That's what makes this real. Below them, the ranch spread out in the evening light, the house with its gleaming windows and sturdy walls, the barn standing strong, the pastures filled with cattle, the garden plot where vegetables grew in neat rows. And somewhere in that house, their daughters were probably fighting over something trivial, or reading together, or helping prepare supper, living the childhood that both Evelyn and Caleb had worked so hard to give them. I used to think about the day you arrived, Caleb said, how you looked standing on that platform in rags,
how everyone whispered and judged, how close I came to letting their judgment influence me, to sending you away or treating you like charity instead of seeing you for who you were. What stopped you? Evelyn asked, though she'd never asked before, had never quite dared. Your eyes, he said simply. You were wearing rags and carrying everything you owned in a bag that weighed nothing, but your eyes, they were unbroken. Tired, sad, wary, but not defeated. Not broken. I saw strength in those eyes and courage and stubborn determination, and I thought, maybe someone with eyes like that is exactly what this broken ranch and this broken man and this wounded boy need. I was terrified, Evelyn admitted, absolutely terrified that you'd see through me, that you'd realize I was just pretending to be strong when really I was barely holding myself together. But you weren't pretending, Caleb said. That's what I eventually understood. You weren't pretending to be strong. You were choosing to be strong, which is harder and more real. Every day you chose to keep going, to keep working, to keep hoping. That's not pretense. That's courage. They stood together as the stars began to emerge, one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversation on this porch, their wedding night, every important moment of their years together. If you could go back, Caleb asked quietly, knowing everything that was coming, the hard work, the danger, the struggles, would you still get on that train? Would you still come here? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, 1,000 times yes, because this life, this family, this love, it's worth everything it cost to get here. Every moment of fear and pain and struggle led me to this moment, standing here with you, with our children sleeping safe in that house, with a future stretching out before us. How could I regret any of it? He kissed her then, tender and deep, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely, who'd chosen each other through everything, who'd built a love that would last the rest of their lives and beyond. When they finally returned to the house, they found Ben had arrived for a visit, his fiancée Sarah beside him, and the girls were showing her their treasures and chattering about the wedding plans. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, and Evelyn stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, this beautiful, chaotic, perfect family she'd never dared to dream she could have. Caleb came up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist, and together they watched their family, their children, their future unfolding before them. Thank you, he said softly, for perhaps the 1,000th time since they'd married, and like every time before, she knew he meant it with his whole heart. Thank you, she replied, as she always did, meaning it just as deeply. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of the home they'd built together, Evelyn Rourke understood something profound and true. That sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. That loss can lead to finding, that arriving with nothing can mean you have room to build everything. She'd stepped off a train in rags, desperate and afraid, and a cowboy had seen her worth when no one else did. He'd given her a chance, and she'd given him hope, and together they'd built something neither of them could have created alone. A family, a home, a love story for the ages. And as the years continued to unfold, as Ben built his law practice and married Sarah, as Grace and Rose grew into remarkable young women, as grandchildren eventually arrived to fill the house with new life and laughter, the quilt Evelyn had started so long ago remained folded at the foot of their bed, edges worn from years of use, colors faded by time, but every stitch still holding strong. Just like the love that had made it, just like the family that had built it, just like the story that would be told and retold for generations, of a woman who arrived with nothing and a man who saw everything, of broken pieces that became whole, of a love that proved that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth building, worth believing in, even when all evidence suggests you should give up. This was their story, and it was perfect.